greatly. But joining us right now, we have this guy flagged whenever he has a pronouncement on the floor because he's the smartest guy up there, quite frankly. And I haven't seen him speak, quite frankly. I've been looking for his comment on the mosque, have not seen it. This is the Republican Congressman of Michigan, good friend of the show, Thaddeus McCotter. T-Mac, what's up?
Hey, dude.
Your Congress at work. Right out of the Scooby-Doo van. Nice to talk to you, Thad.
What's up, Shaggy?
Well, that sandwich looks good. What do you make of the mosque, baby? I haven't seen your pronouncement on this yet.
Well, I hate to tell you meddling kids this, but we've been in recess for the month of August. That signal sign you see on the C-SPAN station, it's because we're not there.
Oh, I see. I thought you guys were all there and had gone on deep background or something.
No, very few of us are all there, Dennis. But
So, well, then, for the first time, utter to the people what you make of the mosque, Ground Zero.
Well, it's obvious that Americans have trouble getting their minds around the nature of the conflict in which we're engaged because the enemy has a religious point of view. We can argue that, I would think rightly, that it's an apostate version of Islam that is exploiting that. But to the American mindset, which has been raised on religious tolerance, it is just anathema to us. It's not an ideology like fascism or communism. And so they have difficulty with it. And this is one of the things that I think is happening with the situation. As I talked about on Detroit radio, which you obviously were not listening to, I pointed out that you have a right in America to do something. You can also have a concomitant responsibility not to do it, to exercise that right. And what we're seeing in New York, which I think is rightly being handled in New York rather than in Washington, is they're trying to make the determination. No one is arguing over the religious freedom aspect of it. It's the question of whether this is a responsible action that will facilitate understanding or not. Mm-hmm. And that's a determination, I think, that is causing people to consider this question throughout the country. And it's causing, in many ways, some very heated dialogue, which I think doesn't particularly help.
Well, we've come down to the proverbial hummus fork in the road here, and there is a chance for outreach here. And I hope that our friends on that side of it realize, ironically, the potential for outreach here is to not build it. Because, listen, everybody knows in their head where the crazies are and who's crazy, and everybody doesn't lapse that over into the general Islamic faith. But I do think they're about to be labeled as enablers at some point if somebody doesn't step up and say, well, of course, just in the name of taste and, dare I say, ham-handedness, we shouldn't build this here. I talked to Dr. Zuhdi Jasser the other day. He's an eloquent spokesman from the Islamic side of things, but I haven't heard many other voices. Do you think they're near coming to the fore on this, or no?
Well, I'm not sure, because I think that as the debate tends to get more heated, it becomes more difficult for the reasoned voices to enter into it. And I think that what you're putting your finger on is the fact that so many Americans realize that understanding is a two-way street. Remember, the United States was attacked by people exploiting, expropriating the name of Islam, and the United States has done very much to show that it is not going to cast a wide net and blame people of that religion that are not, that are actually being abused in the process more than anyone. And so when the United States citizens see this, and they admit that there's a right to it, but is it the responsible thing to do, they're feeling that understanding has to be a two-way street, and there has to be real dialogue here, rather than simply feeling as if because you have a right to do something, you're going to do whatever you want regardless. That will not facilitate understanding.
Yes, we're talking to Republican Congressman from Michigan, Thaddeus McCotter. And my feeling is this will probably come down to the minutiae of New York building codes and such. And already the construction unions here have said they're not going to exist. I remember years ago there was a brilliant book by Richard Reeves called Convention. It had a chapter called The $700 Light Bulb, about a light bulb burning out at Madison Square during the Democratic Convention and all the intricacies that went into putting a new light bulb in. And I'm thinking that if they go ahead and demand this be built there, it's going to be a death by a million cuts. I mean, they will be permitted out the wazoo. There will be, you know what I mean? There's a million ways to stop down construction. And if they want to feel like suicidal, get into the permitting process in Lower Manhattan, guys. That'll drive you over quicker than the virgins will.
Well, and as you know, Dennis, there's a lot of us who recognize we live in a federal republic. I'm a federalist, and this is exactly where at the local level these decisions should be made. And they're going to be made there by the people most impacted by it, the people of New York City.
And Jimmy Woo, the Korean grocer across the street, has big sway in this, as a matter of fact. And Jimmy Woo is yet to weigh. But we're looking for his statement.
He's probably out there watching to keep a food truck away from his place.
Let me ask you about how the president has handled this, though. My man is really... he used to have a little Scaramouche into him. You know, he was like Alan Freed. He would at least swing in and, a little sword play. He looked good, man. He has turned into Benjamin Grimm from the FF4. It's crazy how clumsy he's gotten, isn't it?
Scaramouche, he can do a fandango. He can certainly say, he says that they have the right to do it, and then he adds that he doesn't want to get involved in the determination, which is a very rather interesting way of saying nothing.
Yes, he's the king of caveat empties now, is what I would call the president, because he's always, Axelrod grabs him the moment he gets on the other side of the portico and says, for God's sakes, we're trying to keep this job. You get back in there tomorrow morning with some whiteout and patch this up. What are you, nuts? And that seems to be a daily occurrence down there. We're talking to Thaddeus McCotter, Republican congressman from Michigan. What else is on your plate up there, T-Mac, other than the Mosque? What are you pushing? You got some what's it called when you pass things? Legislation. You got something ready?
Well, again, we're not in session.
I know, but when you come back, listen, you guys are too hard on yourselves. You do most of your brilliant work when you're out of session. But
you're certainly safer. But the reality that we have in Michigan is, again, we understand this is a structural recession. It's part of the transition from industrial to globalized economy, and the rest of the country seems to be fighting that. And Dennis, we see this nowhere no more obviously than the instance where the Speaker called us back to pass a $26 billion bailout for state governments. This because their $1 trillion government bubble did not do anything to help stimulate the economy. Mm-hmm. It did not allow for the underlying foundations of the economy to heal. Instead, they went in and exacerbated those. So it was an admission not only of the failure of their policies to date and spending us into a hole, but what they're doing is they're actually going to make it far more painful when the restructuring happens. Inevitably, Dennis, as you know, families have had to restructure for changes in this economy, and not just for the short-term recession. You've seen companies, my Detroit automakers being prime examples of those who've had to restructure painfully for the future. The only entity that refuses to do this is government. And so when you see the Democrats, all they have left is spending to prop up a model of governance that is not going to continue, the industrial welfare state, highly bureaucratized, centralized model. It's an entrepreneurial world. It's a world where you can communicate in the palm of your hands across continents in seconds. It is not a place where Lyndon Johnson's Great Society is going to be able to be sustained on the backs of the American people.
Let me ask you the layman's $26 billion question here. Here's what we don't understand. If we find out that a good, and I've heard varying estimates, but $200 to $300 billion of the original outlay has not been spent, why do we have to go in for fresh Klan? Why don't we just knock the 26 out of there? I guess we don't understand out here.
Well, I think they understand that what they're doing isn't working. And so they're going to try to make sure that they can continue to prop up the government bubble that replaced the housing bubble as long as they can. See, the difficulty for the Democrats is, as you and I know at our advanced age, is that we lived through this in the 70s. We saw where they came in with the best of intentions and did not realize that their policies would actually exacerbate the situation. Mm-hmm. When you talk about President Obama being off message or being inept or being inelegant in how he says things, it's because they are shocked that what they're doing doesn't work today any more than it did in the stagflation era of the 70s. Mm-hmm. They're shocked that our foreign policy, which is very akin to the Carter administration, doesn't work today any more than it did in the 1970s. And so the reason they hold that money back is because they know that what they're doing isn't working, and they just think that if they give it more time and a whole lot more of your money, that somehow it's going to catch fire. The reality is it won't.
I hate to cast aspersions, but I would say Jimmy Carter is a chronic exacerbator.
Yes, and I think it's still a sin even to think about in the Catholic Church.
I always thought that that wasn't a colic. He was fantasizing in his own brain. But I'm surprised Habitat for Humanity trusts this nut with a freaking hammer. That's the way I look at Carter, and he started a lot of this way back when. All right, and where's Frank Church gone after he defangs our
Church Commission?
Yeah, he defangs our. He and who's the cat out of New Jersey who also, the guy who was buying TVs for his madam in Chicago, not in the 70s, but just a couple years ago. He was also the guy who said we couldn't do business with felons on that side of the aisle. Between those two, they defanged our intelligence agency to the point where, our only men in the field right now are Boris Badenoff and Natasha. 866-509-RANT, 866-509-7268. You got time for a phone call, T-Mac?
Yeah.
All right.
This is from a flying squirrel.
Let's go to Steve in Texas. Fan mail from some flounder? Go ahead, Stevie.
Hello, Dennis.
How are you?
Just one question for you. If this is an outreach mosque, when these and other religions don't allow infidels, anybody outside their religion, inside once it's built, how is this outreaching?
Well, it isn't. It's all a bit of a. It's been thrown up, but this is the test. This is the scrum. That's what's happening here. We've got a scrum, and they're about to throw this mosque ball, into the middle of it, and we best be rough viewing because we got to assume turf here. If we look like the weak horse before, we're going to look absolutely Shetland if we let this go up, right, Dan?
Yeah, the pony analogy was a bit strained, but I was just more curious as to whether or not you've got your membership in Gutfeld's new club next door to it.
No, what is the gay club? Gutfeld he loves to put the stick in the eye of the strong horse, as they say. Hey, we appreciate it, T-Mac. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you down the road. Thaddeus McCotter, Republican